The sea isn't black tonight. It's a moving slab of ink, broken by ice, and the glow of wake light where a bow cuts freezing water. Off the quarter, a dull thump travels through steel. Not an explosion, a sonar ping swallowed by wind. Men on the bridge blink against needles of snow. Every breath feels like glass. Below them, in a cramped operations room lit by red lamps, a hand draws a greased pencil line across a plotting table. The convoy is a thin string of cargo ships, almost invisible in polar night, and the escorts are forced to guard it by sound, by instinct, and by scraps of information that arrive late. If a single torpedo hits the right hull, tanks and fuel die in the water, and an army feels it weeks later. By the end of this story, you'll understand why the Arctic Ghost Fleet wasn't saved by bigger guns. It survived by turning darkness, smoke, and early radar into a weapon, and by treating time and temperature as enemies just as real as U-boats and cruisers. The Murmansk run was arithmetic. Convoys moved through a corridor where Norway's fjords and airfields sat within reach, and where freezing spray attacked ships from the inside. In winter, darkness hit everyone, but it also removed the most trusted sensor of all, the human eye. So the fight became about who could build a picture first and who could deny one. Exhibit A is a convoy name that sounds like a filing label. JW-51B, late December 1942. It carries trucks, aircraft parts, and ammunition, things that become sorties and brigades once unloaded. Its close escort is destroyers and smaller ships forming a moving shield. The German surface force waiting in the cold is heavier on paper. The heavy cruiser, Admiral Hipper, the pocket battleship Lützow, and supporting destroyers. Their idea is straightforward. Break the screen with gunfire, then sink the merchants. That plan assumes clear sight and steady targets. The Barents Sea offers neither. It offers blur, false horizons, and snow squalls that erase distance. And it adds an ingredient that changes the rules. Radar, young and imperfect, but decisive because there is almost nothing else to see. The escort's first enemy is cold. Salt spray freezes on contact. Ice grows on rails and fittings, adding weight high on the ship and changing stability. Systems stiffen, and every hard turn becomes riskier. Escorts also can't sit in a neat ring. They dart outward to chase sonar contacts, swing back to cover a lagging freighter, then sprint again when a radar return appears. Every burst of speed burns fuel. Every course change risks collision in darkness. And every radio message risks being found by direction finding. So the escort commander reaches for something that sounds passive but is aggressive in practice. Concealment. Smoke becomes armor, not to hide damage. To deny the enemy their only reliable aim, optical range finding. In polar night, a cruiser captain wants a clear line of sight and a steady target. Smoke takes both away. In cold air, it can cling low, flatten, and slide across the water like a moving wall. Used well, it doesn't just obscure the convoy, it changes the geometry of the fight, forcing the attacker to keep recalculating while the defender keeps moving. When the German ships close, the first minutes are confusion. Radar returns smear and squalls, but the escorts aren't blind. A radar operator calls out a bearing and range, and the convoy shifts a few degrees. Not enough to scatter, just enough to complicate torpedo angles and interrupt gunnery solutions. Here is the contradiction that makes JW-51B worth attention. The heavier force finds the lighter force, yet the lighter force refuses to be pinned. Destroyers show themselves just long enough to draw fire, then vanish behind smoke. They launch torpedoes not only to hit, but to force a cruiser to turn away, breaking pursuit and buying minutes. The convoy does not win by trading blows. It wins by staying unbroken. Exhibit B is restraint under bad information. The escorts can't see the convoy perfectly either, and they have one job that overrides pride: keep the merchants moving. The moment an escort captain chases a duel for its own sake, a freighter dies alone in the dark. So escorts take hits, peel off, and return to the screen. They accept that winning means the convoy is still intact by nightfall. Under the gunfire is a timing chain the Arctic makes brutal. Weather can cut off reconnaissance. Damage far from base becomes a retreat problem, and every extra hour increases the odds that heavier British forces will arrive. The British don't need to sink a cruiser to win. They need to make staying feel expensive. That is what happens. Torpedo alarms force sharp turns. Smoke walls steal targets. Radar contacts appear, then fade. The convoy becomes a ghost again, present but unlocatable in any reliable way. German gunners score hits, but never the clean, continuous punishment that would leave the merchants dead in the water. This is where people get the Arctic wrong. They imagine a simple contest, big ships versus small ships. What people get wrong is that the far north shifts the weight from firepower to process. The process is detection, maneuver, concealment, and command discipline. If that process holds, a modest escort can survive contact with a stronger attacker because the attacker cannot cash in its advantage. An anchored slice makes the point. In the Barents Sea on December's short day, a destroyer shudders over heavy seas. On the bridge, an officer watches the compass repeater while ice blooms on the rails. A new course order comes through, then the bark to make more smoke. And when the Germans withdraw, the convoy keeps steaming east, bruised but moving. The Ghost Fleet survives not by overpowering the enemy, but by refusing to be fixed in place. But the sea fight is only the visible layer. Under it is an information war, radio discipline, direction finding, and deception, where a single decision about what to transmit can decide whether the next convoy is found at all, or whether the Germans chase a phantom while real ships slip through the dark. And the first thing that disappears isn't a ship, it's certainty. The smoke and snow don't just hide silhouettes, they break the enemy's measurement. Rangefinders want a crisp masthead, gunners want a steady bearing. In the far north, they often get a ghost. The escorts understand that invisibility can be engineered. It's not luck, it's procedure. A convoy isn't one fight. It's a pipeline of decisions repeated night after night. When to light anything, when to transmit, when to turn, when to risk a depth charge run that drags your screen out of position. The Arctic punishes sloppy routine more than it rewards boldness. Now place a second threat into the same darkness: the U-boat. A surface cruiser battle is loud and obvious. A submarine attack is a quiet math problem. A periscope is a fraction of a second. A torpedo solution is a thin wedge of time where speed, bearing, and distance align. The convoy's defense has to live in both worlds, one measured in shells and smoke, the other in pings, prop noise, and cold water layers that bend sound. Exhibit C is sound. Arctic seas can create temperature layers that refract sonar, making a contact seem closer, farther, or wrong. Ice noise adds clutter. A destroyer's own propellers can mask the thing it's trying to hear. So escorts don't just search, they manage a detection cycle. Slow to listen, speed to reposition, then slow again. but every slow period increases danger from air or surface ships if the weather opens for even 10 minutes. What people get wrong is thinking the convoy is passive cargo protected by active warships. The convoy itself is part of the defensive system. Merchant captains hold speed, keep station, obey blackout, and accept that a single straggler creates a beacon for everything hunting them. Discipline isn't just military, it's industrial and it's enforced by the sea. There is another invisible weapon in this corridor: direction finding. A short, careless transmission can give an enemy a line of bearing. Several bearings over time produce a fix. In a clear sea, ships can be seen. In the Arctic, they are often found by math instead. That's why radio silence is not merely a rule. It's armor. But silence has a cost. Silence means a destroyer can't warn the convoy of a contact without prearranged signals. Silence means a damaged ship may not be able to call for help. Silence means mistakes persist longer because nobody can coordinate corrections in real time. The convoy chooses silence anyway because being found early is usually worse than being uncoordinated for a few minutes. The Germans adapt too. When surface forces can't reliably pin a convoy, the hunt shifts toward layered threat. U-boats for the kill, aircraft for pressure, and surface ships as a hammer waiting for the moment when the screen is stretched and the convoy is forced into predictable movement. This is where the far north becomes a workshop for combined arms at sea. Air attacks in the Arctic are not simple bombing runs. They are navigation problems. The same weather that hides a convoy can scatter aircraft and cause misidentification. And yet, even a small air contact changes escort behavior. A destroyer that must maneuver to avoid bombs is not listening to sonar. A convoy forced to turn to complicate an airdrop is also turning into new torpedo geometry. So the escort commander plays a constant trade-off: concealment versus awareness. Smoke hides, but it also blinds your lookouts. Speed helps you reposition, but it raises noise. Depth charges deter a U-boat, but they may reveal your screen's edge and create a gap. An anchored vignette, early to mid-war far north, makes the constraint real. It's pre-dawn, but dawn is a rumor. A destroyer rides up and down, the deck coated in ice. A sonar operator calls a faint contact that could be a whale, could be a U-boat, could be nothing but the sea's own machinery. The captain decides to slow, risking surface surprise to listen one more minute. That minute is the difference between a clean torpedo track and an escort that is already turning to spoil it. Then a radar return flickers at the edge of range. Not a ship, too intermittent, likely aircraft. The captain has to choose. If he accelerates and starts weaving now, he may break sonar contact and lose the submarine. If he stays slow, he becomes a steady target for the sky. The Arctic doesn't give you clean categories. It forces you to triage threats under uncertainty. The convoy's survival then becomes an engineering problem in the broadest sense. How to keep a system functioning when every sensor is degraded and every action has side effects. The escort can't win every engagement. It has to prevent any single engagement from becoming decisive. This is why the Arctic earned its reputation as a ghost route. The ships are there, hundreds of them across the war, but they spend much of their time unobserved, and when they are observed, the observation is partial. That partial picture leads to flawed decisions. A cruiser fires at what it thinks is the convoy's heart and hits smoke. A U-boat reports a position that is already wrong because the convoy made a small turn under cover. Aircraft return with vague sightings that don't translate into a usable intercept. And yet none of this means the convoy is safe. It means the convoy is continuously being measured and continuously trying to corrupt the enemy's measurement. The next step in the case is to show how the Allies began to industrialize that corruption, using decoys, timing windows, and routing logic to make the enemy chase the wrong convoy in the right ocean, while the real ships slip through in the dark. And once you accept that measurement can be corrupted, the next question is who gets to write the ocean's picture. Sometimes the ghost is deliberate. Escorts could throw out a false shape with smoke, but deception at sea is usually quieter. Routing choices that look irrational, brief bursts of radio traffic timed to be heard, or a convoy that seems to hesitate long enough to invite a fix, then turns into weather the moment the enemy commits. The aim isn't to be invisible forever. It's to be invisible at the exact moment the enemy needs certainty. Exhibit D is timing. In the far north, time is a weapon because daylight arrives in chunks. A few hours of clear visibility can turn a hunt into a massacre. So planners leaned into the clock. Sailings chosen to cross the most exposed areas under the worst possible observation conditions, and to arrive under the best possible cover. When that wasn't possible, they built layers, extra screens, concentrated escort strength, and tighter station keeping, just for the bad window. Then loosened again when weather returned. But the enemy learned the same calendar. German reconnaissance flights and patrol patterns sought those windows, and U-boats didn't need daylight. They needed predictability. That is where routing becomes the real contest. A convoy's course is never a straight line from Britain to the Soviet ports. It is a moving compromise between ice edges, fuel limits, sea room for maneuver, and the reach of aircraft. What people get wrong is thinking convoys were simply sent and then attacked. The route is an engineered solution, updated like a machine schedule. If the ice pack shifts south, a convoy may be pushed into a narrower corridor where submarines can guess the lanes. If escorts must refuel early, the screen thins exactly when a commander expects it. And if the convoy turns to avoid a surface threat, it may accidentally enter an air search box. So the Allies built flexibility into the system. Better meteorology, faster ice reporting, disciplined navigation, and clear procedures for emergency turns mattered because they reduced the time the convoy spent confused. Confusion is detectable. A convoy that is steady looks like noise. A convoy that hesitates looks like a target. Then there are decoys and distractions. Not the Hollywood kind, but the kind that exploit how information travels. A submarine report moves up a chain, gets filtered, and becomes a plotted track. If the initial report is slightly wrong, every later decision carries that error. A short-lived false contact can pull a screen away. A single aircraft sighting can trigger evasive maneuvers that open gaps. In the Arctic, it doesn't take much to move an enemy force into empty water. Now bring surface raiders back into the story. Surface ships are rare visitors here because they are expensive and fragile in the wrong conditions. Yet their threat is outsized because heavy guns can break the convoy system quickly. This is why escort commanders treat surface threat as a category that changes everything, even if the ship never appears. It forces the convoy to choose between tight formation and dispersion, and it forces escorts to keep fuel and speed in reserve to respond. Anchored vignette. Late winter, early to mid-war, Barents sea conditions. A convoy presses east under a ceiling of clouds so low it feels like the ship is inside a room. Radar ranges are shortened by sea clutter. A lookout can see maybe a mile, maybe less. Somewhere beyond that is the thing everyone fears. Not a single submarine, but the idea that a surface group might be maneuvering on a bearing provided by a brief radio intercept. The escort commander makes a decision that looks like cowardice from shore and like sanity at sea. He orders a turn that makes no shortest path sense. It wastes time and fuel. It also shifts the convoy away from where the enemy expects the ice edge to funnel them. The convoy's wake becomes a lie. Minutes later, the clouds open just enough for aircraft to see nothing obvious, because the convoy is no longer where the plotted line says it should be. That is the Ghost Fleet in action, not spectral. Managed, Exhibit E is communication discipline under stress. Escorts relied on prearranged signals, shielded lamps, brief flags when visibility allowed, sound signals when close, to coordinate without giving the enemy a radio handle. When radio had to be used, it was short, procedural, and timed. The technology is simple. The engineering is in the doctrine. The submarine problem still forced the system to reveal itself. To stop a boat, you often have to show that you found it. A hard depth charge run announces, "Contact here." That can be useful too. If the enemy believes the escort screen is occupied on one flank, it may shift its own approach. A convoy can sometimes trade one revealed fact for a better concealment. Let the enemy focus on a decoy contact while the real formation tightens and changes course. All of this points to a larger principle. Arctic convoy warfare is not sea battles in snow. It is a contest between two imperfect information systems. One system tries to create a stable flow of ships across a hostile corridor. The other tries to interrupt that flow by turning uncertainty into opportunity. The winner is often the one who can reduce uncertainty faster after every shock, after a sighting, after a ping, after a sudden break in weather. By the later stages of the campaign, the Allies begin to compress that recovery time. Radar improves, air cover becomes more consistent, escort composition evolves. But that improvement creates a dilemma. As the convoy becomes harder to hit, the enemy is pushed toward riskier, closer attacks. And those attacks happen so fast that a single mistake in the screen can still be fatal. And that brings us to the final question the Ghost Fleet can't dodge. When the fog lifts and the enemy commits anyway, what is the one piece of engineering the convoy depends on to avoid a cascade? And the answer, almost always, is whether the convoy can keep its shape when the first shock lands. In the Arctic, that shock can arrive without warning. A torpedo track spotted too late. A radar blip that resolves into a fast-moving surface contact, or a sudden break in the weather that turns fog into a floodlight. The system's strength is formation, but formation is also a constraint. If ships scatter, submarines get easy angles. If ships stay tight, a single hit can cause collisions, blocked rudders, and cascading confusion. So the real engineering isn't steel alone. It's procedure under stress. When the alarm goes, the convoy must do two things at once: evade and remain predictable to its own escorts. That contradiction is where the Ghost either survives or becomes a wreck. Merchants are told to zigzag on schedules, not improvisation. Escorts are told to hold lanes, not chase every phantom. And the Commodore's orders are meant to be simple enough that a tired helmsman in sleet can follow them without interpretation. Exhibit F is the moment a convoy learns whether it has discipline or merely hope. Anchored vignette. An early mid-war convoy eastbound. A cold gray afternoon in the Norwegian Sea trending toward the Barents. Visibility improves suddenly, just enough to see silhouettes that were only shadows minutes ago. A lookout yells a bearing, then another. The ocean doesn't change, but everything else does. The escort commander knows what the enemy wants. Break the shape, create gaps, turn a protected flow into individual targets. He doesn't order brilliance. He orders compliance. The screen tightens. The nearest escorts push out and then slide back into station, creating a moving fence. A couple of ships in the convoy begin to turn too sharply, their helms overcorrecting, wake crossing wake. That's how cascades begin. Not with torpedoes, but with human timing. A merchant that falls behind creates a hole. A hole becomes an invitation. An invitation becomes a loss. What people get wrong is believing that the battle is the moment of impact. The battle is the minute before, when every ship chooses whether to act as an individual or as a component. The enemy is trying to isolate one part of the machine and overload it. The defenders are trying to keep load distributed across the system. If the threat is submarines, escorts must decide how much to reveal. A depth charge attack can be necessary, but it also broadcasts attention. In the far north, sound travels strangely. Sea state changes can distort bearings. A good contact can evaporate in minutes. A commander who commits too long can leave the convoy thin on the side that matters. So the escorts adopt a bias. Quick, violent, and then back. Short attack runs. Immediate reassessment. Return to screen. The goal is not always to kill. It's to deny the approach and keep the convoy moving. Perfection wasn't the point. Availability was. If the threat is surface ships, the logic shifts again. Surface fire can shred a convoy quickly, and the counter is not heroics, but distance, smoke, and concentration of force. The convoy may turn away as one, buying time and forcing the attacker to chase through uncertainty. Escorts may lay smoke to break optical tracking and compel the enemy to rely on imperfect sensors and estimates. And always there is weather, the third combatant. It can protect the convoy, but it can also sabotage the defenders. A squall can hide a U-boat's approach. Ice can limit maneuvering room and lock ships into predictable lanes. Cold can jam weapons, stiffen hydraulics, and slow every repair that matters. That is why the convoy system, over time, becomes less romantic and more technical. Better radar sets and better operators reduce the number of unknowns in the near field. Improved air cover, when it exists, shrinks the enemy's freedom to surface and shadow. Escort composition evolves, with specialized ships and tactics tuned for the environment. But each improvement creates a new enemy response. When the convoy gets harder to find, the attacker must take greater risks, and risk compresses time. Compressed time punishes hesitation. So what kept the Ghost Fleet alive? Not a single miracle technology. It was a layered reduction in uncertainty. Navigation discipline that prevented the convoy from advertising confusion. Routing choices that avoided predictable funnels. Communications restraint that starved the enemy of steady fixes, and escort doctrine that valued screen integrity over ego. Add the simplest human factor of all, training that made boring procedures feel automatic, and the convoy could absorb shocks without dissolving. And when it failed, the failure pattern was painfully consistent. A sudden threat triggered individualized reactions. Ships deviated without coordination. Escorts chased too far. Gaps widened. Once gaps exist, every other decision becomes harder because the enemy no longer has to solve the convoy. He only has to solve one ship. That's the deeper principle the Arctic teaches. In a high uncertainty environment, survival is an information problem first and a firepower problem second. The side that can keep its system coherent under partial sight wins more often than the side with the sharper weapon. The unsung battles of the far north weren't always measured in exploding hulls. They were measured in minutes of confusion avoided, in course changes made early instead of late, in radio silence held when panic wanted noise, and in the quiet discipline of ships that stayed together when every instinct said to run alone. If you want a final verdict you can carry to any war machine, it's this. The Ghost Fleet wasn't invisible, it was organized. And organization is the only kind of magic that scales. Thanks for watching. If you want more World War II stories told through real constraints and mechanisms, subscribe. Link is in the description.